one man lost everything. His first business collapsed underneath him. The one character he'd built his entire career around, legally taken from him in a single meeting by people he trusted. Everyone around him figured that was the end, a guy who'd already had his shot and blown it. Then on a train ride home, broke and humiliated, he made one decision. A decision that would go on to reshape entertainment for the next 100 years. Walt Disney was born December 5, 1901, in Chicago, and spent a chunk of his childhood on a farm in Marceline, Missouri. His father, Elias, was strict, old-school strict. Money was tight, and there wasn't a lot of room in that house for daydreaming. Every morning long before sunrise, young Walt was up delivering newspapers alongside his father. Freezing mornings, heavy bags, hours before school even started. That was the routine. And somewhere in between all that, the exhaustion, the chores, the cold, Walt was drawing, on scraps of newspaper, on the back of homework, sketching the farm animals he saw every single day, selling little drawings to neighbors for pocket change, just to feel like his art was worth something to somebody. His father wasn't exactly thrilled about any of it. Art didn't pay bills in Elias' world. There was real tension in that house over what Walt was supposed to become versus what he actually wanted to be. Walt kept drawing anyway. At 16, he lied about his age to join the Red Cross Ambulance Corps during World War I, driving ambulances overseas while the war wound down. He came back to the U.S. with a little more grit than he left with, and went straight back to chasing the one thing nobody in his family thought would ever pay off. Keep drawing, that's the thread running through this entire story. Remember it because it comes back again and again. In the early 1920s, Walt starts an animation company in Kansas City called Laugh-O-Gram Studio. He's talented. He's putting in real work. It goes bankrupt anyway. Not tight on cash bankrupt. Actually broke, by some accounts, eating cold beans out of a can because that's genuinely what he could afford. This is usually where the internal battle starts, even if nobody was around to hear it. Was this it? Had his father been right the whole time? A 21-year-old with a failed company and no plan has every reason to fold right there. He didn't fold. He packed up and headed to Hollywood with roughly $40 to his name. But here's a part of the story that doesn't get nearly enough credit. Walt wasn't building this alone. His older brother, Roy O. Disney, joined him in California, and Roy might honestly be the reason any of this survived long enough to matter. Walt was the dreamer. Roy was the one keeping the lights on, negotiating with banks, managing what little money they had, talking Walt down when his ideas got too big for their bank account. Dreamer and realist, by the mid-1920s, Walt and Roy build a new character together, Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, distributed through a man named Charles Mintz. Oswald takes off. Real success. Real momentum for the first time in years. So Walt travels to New York to renegotiate his contract, expecting some leverage. The character's a hit, surely that's worth something. Instead, he finds out two things in the same meeting. One, Mintz, and by extension the studio behind him, legally owns the rights to Oswald, not Walt. Two, Mintz has already quietly signed away most of Walt's own animators to work for him directly. In a single conversation, Walt loses the character, most of his team, and any leverage he thought he had. He gets on a train back to California. And according to how the story's been told for decades since, somewhere on that long ride home, broke, furious, and staring down the possibility that his career was finished a second time, Walt starts sketching a new character. A mouse. He originally wanted to call him Mortimer. As the story's commonly told, it was his wife, Lillian, who thought Mickey sounded better, though historians note the exact details of that exchange aren't fully documented. So treat it as a beloved piece of Disney folklore rather than a confirmed transcript of events. This time, Walt made absolutely sure he kept the legal rights himself. Here's the part that usually gets skipped. Mickey Mouse wasn't an instant hit. The first two cartoons Walt made, silent shorts, couldn't even find a distributor. Nobody wanted them. Redesigns happened. Doors kept closing. Then Walt bets on something new. Synchronized sound, timed precisely to the animation, at a moment when the technology was barely being used in film at all. The result is Steamboat Willie, released in November 1928, one of the first cartoons ever to sync sound directly with the action on screen. It's a sensation. Audiences had genuinely never experienced anything like it. Mickey Mouse doesn't succeed because Walt got lucky on a train. He succeeds because Walt kept iterating through rejection until something actually landed. By the mid-1930s, the studio's doing fine making animated shorts. Stable, profitable even. Walt decides that's not enough. He wants to make the first full-length, hand-drawn animated feature film in movie history, a scale nobody in the industry had attempted. The budget balloons from an initial estimate of roughly $250,000 to about $1.5 million, an almost unthinkable amount of money in the middle of the Great Depression. Walt personally mortgages his own house to help keep it funded. The press starts calling it Disney's Folly, printed, publicly, as a prediction that this would be the mistake that finally sank him. Inside the studio, this wasn't just a business risk, it was an obsession. Walt reportedly acted out scenes himself in front of his animators so they could study real human movement and translate it onto paper. He demanded redraw after redraw after redraw when something didn't feel emotionally right, even if it meant blowing the schedule and the budget further. Animators worked brutal late into the night hours. By multiple accounts, several artists were visibly shaken, some reportedly in tears, while animating the film's most emotional sequences, because they'd become that attached to characters they'd spent months building frame by frame. This wasn't persistence for its own sake. This was Walt's defining trait, an obsession with getting it right no matter what it cost. In December 1937, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs hits theaters. It doesn't flop. It becomes the highest-grossing film released up to that point in history, pulling in roughly $8 million in its initial run, during the Depression, and proving for the first time that animation could carry an entire feature film. The gamble the press had already buried came out the other side, as the foundation of In 1940, the studio releases Fantasia, an ambitious, genuinely innovative film pairing animation with orchestral music and an early surround sound format called Fantasound. Critically respected. Financially, it underperforms, expensive theater installations, and a world sliding into war overseas cut deeply into its returns. Then World War II arrives, and a chunk of the studio gets requisitioned by the U.S. military for training and propaganda films, pulling resources away from Walt's own creative projects for years. And in 1941, something maybe more painful than any of that. An animator's strike breaks out at Walt's own studio, over pay and union recognition. For a man who saw his animators as family, this reportedly hit him hard, a reminder that being demanding, and even brilliant, doesn't automatically make you easy to work for. It's worth saying plainly, Walt Disney was not a simple, uncomplicated hero. He was intensely perfectionistic, difficult for some employees to work under and slow to compromise when he believed he was right. That doesn't cancel out what he built. It just makes him a real person instead of a slogan. By the 1950s, Walt has a new obsession. He'd take his daughters to amusement parks and watch them ride the carousel while he sat on a bench, bored, surrounded by grime and a general sense that these places weren't really built with families in mind. He wanted something different, a place where parents and kids could genuinely enjoy themselves together. Banks weren't exactly lining up to fund it. So Walt made an unconventional bet. He partnered with the ABC television network, producing a weekly show, partly to build buzz, partly because ABC's roughly $5 million investment helped make the park's $17 million price tag possible in the first place. Disneyland gets built in just about a single year of non-stop construction. Opening day, July 17, 1955, should have been the triumphant payoff. Instead, Disney employees who lived through it still call it Black Sunday. Walt himself got accidentally locked inside his own apartment above the Main Street firehouse that morning and had to shout out the window for someone to let him out. Counterfeit tickets flooded the gates. The park expected around 15,000 guests and got over 28,000. A gas leak forced the temporary closure of several lands, including Fantasyland, with reports of a small fire near the castle grounds. A plumber's strike meant Walt had to choose, literally, between working drinking fountains or working restrooms. He picked restrooms, and on a record-hot day, thirsty crowds quickly drained every stand of food and drink in the park. Fresh asphalt on Main Street hadn't fully cured in the heat, and women's heels sank straight into the pavement, some left stuck behind entirely. The Mark Twain riverboat, overloaded with roughly 500 guests, tilted, took on water, and ran aground. By nearly every measure, opening day was a disaster. Broadcast lived to nearly half the households in America. And yet, within weeks, attendance climbed. Word of mouth turned. The thing everybody had questioned became one of the most visited destinations on the planet. Another gamble, another public near failure, another comeback. It's easy to reduce this story to the guy who never gave up. That's true, but it undersells what actually made Disney exceptional. He kept changing the rules of his own industry. Synchronized sound with Steamboat Willie in 1928. Full Technicolor animation, winning the first-ever Academy Award given for an animated short. The multiplane camera, giving flat animation real depth for the first time. The first full-length animated feature, an entirely new category of themed entertainment with Disneyland. Later, an early and aggressive move into producing content directly for television. He also consistently reinvested profits back into the next risky idea instead of just pocketing the wins, which is a big part of why the studio kept evolving instead of coasting on one success. Persistence got him back up. Obsessive innovation is what kept him ahead. Walt Disney died on December 15, 1966, from complications related to lung cancer. He never got to see Walt Disney World open in Florida. His brother Roy, the steady realist who'd been quietly holding the business together since those early Hollywood days, came out of retirement to push the Florida project through to completion. Walt Disney World opened in October 1971. Roy died just 2 months later, having seen the project through before stepping away for good. Walt's original vision for EPCOT wasn't a theme park at all. He'd imagined it as an actual functioning experimental city, a working prototype for how communities of the future might be designed. What eventually opened in 1982 became something generations of kids since then have grown up on stories that trace back to a farm boy in Marceline sketching on the backs of newspapers before sunrise. Let's talk real numbers, but let's actually put them in perspective instead of just throwing figures at you. For fiscal year 2025, the Walt Disney Company reported roughly $94.4 billion in total revenue. That single company generates more annual revenue than the entire GDP of many individual countries. The Parks and Experiences division alone posted a record $10 billion in operating income for the year. Globally, the company employs somewhere around 233,000 people. Every single day, across parks, streaming, movies, and merchandise, millions of people around the world interact with something carrying this one man's name. A man who, at 21 years old, was eating beans out of a can in a bankrupt studio with the lights about to get shut off. That little mouse, sketched on a train by a broke, humiliated man who just lost everything, became the face of one of the most influential entertainment companies that has ever existed. Not because Walt Disney never failed. He failed constantly: bankruptcy, betrayal, a financially disappointing passion project, a labor strike that fractured trust with his own team, and a park opening so chaotic his own staff nicknamed it Black Sunday. He got there because every single time life erased his drawing, he picked the pencil back up. If there's a dream you're sitting on right now that people are calling unrealistic, remember this story isn't really about talent. It's about what you do the moment everything falls apart. Keep drawing. If this hit you the right way, hit follow. Drop a comment with one dream you